Imagine the scene. August 1943, and a locomotive, loaded with hundreds of captured German troops, chugs into the tiny Texas settlement of Hearne, home to just around 10,000 folks. These fighters, battle-toughened members of Rommel's Africa Corps, gaze out from the rail cars, bracing for the unimaginable. Tales had circulated, whispers of brutal U.S. detention sites, hints of torment or kill teams lurking in remote spots beyond the reach of Geneva Convention inspectors. Instead, they faced a blast of steamy Texas warmth, vast expanses of cropland unfurling in all directions, and U.S. sentries who appeared strangely at ease. Camp Hearne stood among more than 500 POW sites dotted throughout America in World War II. Yet it held a unique distinction: its sheer scale. Come 1945, it would hold close to 5,000 German captives, ranking as one of the biggest such operations in the Southwest. The setup covered 400 acres of old cotton railway terrain, featuring lines of lime-washed dormitories, dining areas, a medical center, and even a place of worship. The arriving German leaders that summer had received updates from Allied officials en route across the Atlantic, but the actual setup caught them off guard. Watchtowers loomed, razor wire enclosed everything as expected, but so did playing fields for baseball and a snack bar offering Coca-Cola. Locals showed little thirst for payback. The bewilderment kicked off right away. Oberleutnant Heinrich Fnair, a Luftwaffe aviator downed over Tunisia, jotted in his journal about the odd U.S. informality. Sentries bantered with inmates over ballgame results. The base leader outlined job assignments like a site boss, not a jailer. Regulations existed, rigid ones, but the vibe bore no resemblance to the brutal Eastern Front prisons hyped in Nazi media. One detainee, ex-teacher Otto Heilenberg, remembered his initial supper: fresh white loaf, genuine butter, a hearty beef and veggie ragout. He figured it for a ruse, a mind game prelude to harsher truths. Yet the true mind game, the unplanned kind, hit that opening weekend precisely on Saturday afternoon, September 4th, 1943. Officials declared that well-behaved inmates could sign up for an outing, heading to Central Hearne for a glimpse of U.S. traditions. Roughly 50 Germans, mainly ranks and sergeants, boarded vehicles with minimal oversight. They suspected a publicity stunt, perhaps a victory bond gathering where they'd serve as trophies of conquest. The rides passed rural homes, cotton patches, and halted at a gritty expo site, buzzing with locals clustered by a big roped-off ring. Animal stalls flanked one edge. Fellows in huge brimmed caps and snug trousers warmed up and puffed smokes beside bronc chutes. A horn section blasted lively, unmistakably civilian tunes. The Germans settled into their roped-off spots. U.S. watchers perched close, but their eyes fixed on the ring, not the group. A PA system hummed alive, heralding the opener. Then, pandemonium erupted. A barrier flew wide, unleashing a 1,000-pound beast into the fray. Ryder latched desperately atop it. One fist clutched a rein, the other waved frantically. Spectators bellowed. The captured Germans remained frozen in baffled quiet, puzzling over this apparent combat drill. Sergeant Fritz Haus, leader of a unit from the 21st Panzer Division, edged ahead in his chair, eyes narrowed on the mayhem below. The brute bucked savagely, hurling soil 15 feet skyward as the cowboy bounced like a limp cloth figure, yet clung on. After 8 ticks, a horn blared, and riders on steeds dashed forth to haul the fellow clear. He tumbled free, dashed off, and doffed his lid to roaring cheers. Fritz murmured to his neighbor in German, "Mounted assault practice. Observe the retrieval amid mock fire," his peer agreed deliberately. The notion rang true for warriors long steeped in strategy breakdowns. The following act sealed their view. A wrangler galloped after a fleeing young cow, lariat whirling in exact arcs above. He let fly the snare at just the right instant, snagging the critter's neck flawlessly. The pony dug in its feet, the cord went rigid, and the rider leaped down smoothly, charging to the animal and flipping it down. In less than 10 seconds, he bound its 3 limbs with a finer line. Cheers exploded anew. The Germans swapped sage looks. "Scouting and seizure drills," and Lieutenant grumbled, flipping open his permitted notepad, "mark the synergy of man and beast. The steed holds the line instinctively. No orders needed. Clear evidence of extended drills." As bronco busting kicked off, The tactical lens widened. The Germans' analysis grew increasingly intricate. Wild horses reared and twisted wildly as their riders gripped a simple leather strap with one hand held aloft, forbidden from steadying themselves by touching the beast or gear. To the observers from Germany, this resembled sophisticated preparation for cavalry in chaotic battlefields. They're drilling troops to hold steady amid malfunctioning gear or spooked horses under shelling, Captain Werner Schultz ventured openly. A cluster of captives nearby bobbed their heads in concurrence. It all aligned neatly from their viewpoint. The Wehrmacht boasted its share of punishing drills too, and this struck them as the U.S. counterpart, merely dramatized for the sake of boosting spirits among onlookers. The barrel racing momentarily perplexed them. Young ladies, genuine non-military females, galloped steeds in tight figure-8 loops encircling 3 hefty barrels, hurtling at top velocity and tilting so sharply during bends that their feet almost grazed the earth. One lieutenant from Germany floated the idea of scout courier exercises, honing swift course corrections at full throttle amid duress. A colleague countered that it might mimic logistics path drills, replicating dodges to avoid threats. The involvement of adolescent girls in such routines left them utterly stunned, yet they chalked it up to the U.S. mobilizing every citizen for conflict readiness, echoing the Hitler Youth initiatives in their homeland. Next up was steer wrestling, dubbed bulldogging by the commentator. A rider would lean sharply from his charging mount, seize a fleeing calf by the horns, dig his heels into the soil, and rely on raw power and technique to wrench its neck and topple it sideways. The feat wrapped up in about 5 seconds flat. The detainees stared in undisguised admiration. Close-quarters anti-tank maneuvers for foot soldiers, one murmured, envisioning assaults on fortified foes. The prowess was beyond question, though its intent seemed obvious to them. Wartime honing masked as crowd-pleasing spectacle, probably to safeguard tactics while rallying public backing for elite squads. What eluded them entirely was the core reality. These weren't warriors. They were cattle herders, field laborers, roughnecks from the rigs, and wanderers chasing cash rewards, shiny trophies, and tall tales. The hazards were authentic, the talents truly remarkable. Yet the drive behind it defied the rigid logic of the German armed forces, folks courting grave harm purely for amusement, thrill, or the thrill of the test. The divide between these POWs and their Yankee guards stretched far beyond words or borders. It was a matter of worldview. Every captive at that event had grown up in a world dictating rigid routines for downtime, demanding official sanction for bodily perils, and channeling assemblies toward approved national goals. The notion of self-imposed risks for diversion had no place in their schema. Back home, sports unfolded in regulated leagues under official oversight and federations. Riding skills fell into either Army cavalry regiments or elite equestrian heritage. The prospect of everyday folks assembling on a weekend to witness peers courting fractures and crushed innards for a $75 payout and hometown fame. It defied comprehension. That night, Oberleutnant Hans Huber, a battle-hardened aviator with 16 verified victories, shared his rodeo hypothesis with fellow inmates. Perched on his cot as comrades clustered close, he outlined, "The Yanks have crafted a scattered prep network," he said. "Rather than rigid armies, they weave battle skills into everyday life. Those fellows today? Part-time forces staying sharp via rivalry-based exercises. The spectators' involvement fosters communal drive to perform, sidestepping the call for strict martial order." A number of listeners deemed it persuasive. It accounted for the roars, the awards, the absence of fatigues. From a tactical angle, it was downright ingenious, they mused, sustaining a ready horse-mounted force absent the costs of full-time commitments. But one detainee, ex-academic Ernst Feynman, drafted into the Wehrmacht at 42, remained skeptical. A pre-war scholar of U.S. writings and customs, he'd pored over Steinbeck, grasped the pioneer lore, and once glimpsed a Buffalo Bill notice in Berlin. He offered a contrasting take. "And if this isn't prep for war whatsoever," he posed, "suppose Yanks just relish spectating perilous feats, akin to us catching a soccer game or prize fight." His peers eyed him as if he'd sprouted an extra skull. "Relish it?" Cowboys were visibly hurt. One hobbled off after a bull crushed his limb. Another dripped crimson from his nostrils, post a faceplant into a barrier post. What sort of civilization views such mishaps as diversion rather than sorrow or essential soldiering? This bewilderment highlighted a core clash between the regimented ethos of totalitarian forces and the spirit of American self-reliance. In 1930s and 1940s, Germany, life revolved entirely around shared goals. The Hitler Youth didn't merely engage in sports, they trained for eventual duty. Labor events weren't mere festivities, they instilled a doctrine of efficiency. Art and music alike advanced official stories. The very idea of tackling a grueling, hazardous task simply for the thrill it brought, for the rush of vitality, for linking to a legacy of autonomy. This struck them as utterly alien. Within the German armed forces' perspective, personal peril made sense only if it advanced group aims, such as safeguarding the fatherland, obeying commands, or securing tactical wins. The rodeo embodied a wholly different principle: bold individual initiative. Every rider decided to mount that bull on their own. No one drafted them. No one would punish them for opting out. They had the freedom to leave whenever. Yet they stayed, drawn by the intrinsic value of the test, unswayed by outside approval. To troops raised on the notion that personal decisions ought to further national ends, this Yankee willingness to face danger for self-fulfillment seemed utterly baffling. It came across as disorder topped with a Stetson. How could such a country prevail in conflicts when its people valued solo triumphs over unified order? Still, the Germans sat confined within fences of razor wire, while these allegedly wayward riders roamed unbound. The mental rift ran deep, and for certain captives, it sparked an initial flicker of skepticism toward all their regime's claims about Yankee frailty and moral decay. At Camp Hearn, rules felt ridiculously permissive to those versed in POW setups across Europe or the Pacific Theater. The 1929 Geneva Convention bound signatories like the United States and Germany to handle detainees with decency, supply sufficient meals and housing, and permit non-officers to labor for pay while sparing commanders from toil. The U.S. honored these duties earnestly, driven by both true compassion and shrewd strategy. Officials recognized that numerous U.S. troops languished in German facilities and mutual conduct counted. Should America mistreat German POWs, the Wehrmacht might excuse harsher handling of seized GIs. Thus, Hearn evolved into an odd blend of confinement and employment site. Rigid in certain respects, yet oddly easygoing in others. The routine kicked off with muster at 6 a.m. Detainees assembled by quarters, sentries tallied numbers, and then chow followed in dining halls seating up to 500 at once. Meals often surpassed the fare many German troops had scraped by on in North Africa's waning days, when Rommel's logistics crumbled. Captives got meat multiple times a week, local veggies when farms supplied them, and sufficient energy, about 2,800 calories daily, for laborers to stay fit. The on-site bakery, staffed by former civilian bakers among the POWs, churned out daily loaves and sometimes treats for holidays. Post-meal, crews headed to nearby fields and spreads. By 1943, Texas grappled with acute manpower gaps. Youths had deployed abroad, leaving cotton unpicked, wood uncut, paths unrepaired. The War Department set up arrangements letting area businesses hire POWs at 80 cents daily, with detainees earning that sum in camp currency for canteen buys. Far from benevolence, this stemmed from urgency. Absent such help, much of the countryside's operations would grind to a halt. German POWs harvested cotton with Mexican migrant workers in older ranchers, felled trees in eastern pine woods, and fixed water channels amid scorching summers. Commanders, shielded from physical work by Geneva guidelines, lingered in an odd suspension. They joined learning sessions led by peers, covering topics from basic English to complex math. A few mounted stage shows, crafting detailed props in the leisure center. Others tended modest plots near their lodgings. The reading room boasted more than 3,000 volumes, including plenty in German, gifted by religious outfits and the YMCA. They even ran their own publication, Der Spiegel, composed and produced solely by inmates. U.S. censors scanned every edition prior to release, but the cultural vitality at Hearn rivaled that of a modest university. not a mere detention site. Perimeter watchtowers dotted the edges, patrols ran frequent checks, yet security loomed more laid back than tales from the Eastern Front camp suggested. Sentries frequently conversed with English-fluent prisoners. Conversations often revolved around baseball games, local weather patterns, and tales from their hometowns. Efforts to break out were few and far between. In the middle of rural Texas, how far could one get while speaking only German and standing out as an obvious outsider? The few guys who gave it a shot typically got rounded up by county lawmen within a day and hauled back to the facility, facing isolation in a cell for several weeks as penalty, nothing as severe as a firing squad. A number of captives confessed afterward that they'd made the attempt mostly to uphold their sense of soldierly pride, fully aware success was improbable, yet compelled to show they'd at least made the effort. The oddest customs emerged on weekends. Saturday evenings, inmates could catch films in the communal area, usually classic American cowboy flicks that gained fresh layers of intrigue following their initial rodeo outing. Sunday services, led by the chaplain, covered both Catholic and Protestant gatherings in the morning. Afternoons turned to athletics, soccer games pitting dorm groups against each other, sparring matches in the ring, and foot races. Occasionally, U.S. sentries joined in, leading to bizarre sights of POWs and their overseers spiking a volleyball back and forth as global conflict burned across distant seas. 3 weeks on, the follow-up rodeo excursion took place on September 25, 1943, drawing almost 200 eager inmates who signed up. Rumors of the enigmatic horsemanship displays had buzzed around the site, piquing interest even among the doubters. U.S. officials, thrilled by the apparent triumph of their morale-boosting initiative, secured extra transport vehicles and enlarged the area reserved for captives. Unbeknownst to camp leaders, the German commanders showed up armed with notepads, jotting sketches, and straining to unravel what they suspected were disguised tactical drills concealed in everyday spectacle. On this visit, the group paid closer heed to every nuance. They observed the kickoff parade, ranch hands astride mounts bearing U.S. and Texas banners, thundering in tight ranks around the ring as the Star-Spangled Banner echoed, a display of martial splendor that earned nods from the visitors. Next, the event organizer, a lady in her 50s decked out in a pale cowboy hat and blue-green accessories, detailed the night's lineup over a fuzzy public address system. Her relaxed command puzzled several attendees. What made a non-military female oversee routines that resembled army maneuvers? One detainee speculated she could be an intel specialist operating under civilian pretense. The bareback bucking horse segment launched the action, distinct from the saddled version at the prior event. These competitors clutched just a rawhide strap for hold, no seat or footrests, relying solely on torso power and equilibrium to counter a steed hell-bent on ejection. Rider number 7, a skinny youth no older than 19, faced off against the infamous Widowmaker. As the gate swung wide, the animal exploded upward, slammed down rigid, then spiraled in a gravity-defying whirl. The boy was airborne in mere 4 seconds, crashing onto his arm with force. Medics hurried in, but he brushed them aside, snatched his Stetson from the dust, and hobbled away with a broad smile. Even amid clear agony, this episode sparked a revelation for some onlookers. Captain Werner Schultz, the one so sure about equestrian drill interpretations, saw the hurt rider slap hands with his crew by the pens and sensed a twinge of hesitation. How could such deliberate risk serve any strategic purpose when staying aboard a hostile mount? True mounted warfare demanded stable settings, step-by-step mastery, and avoidance of needless harm. This seemed like orchestrated mayhem, or maybe sheer pandemonium, with scant oversight from healers. He kept quiet among his peers, but a germ of question had taken root. The calf-roping tie-down phase, involving lassoing young steers and binding their limbs, continued to appear purposeful to the majority of the Germans. The quickness, accuracy, and synergy between mount and handler all hinted at battlefield application. Yet the broadcaster clarified that the stadium's top mark stood at 7.2 seconds from release to secured animal, achieved by a cattle herder out of Amarillo with zero armed forces background. A simple herdsman, no uniform in sight. The voice noted how the fellow managed a couple hundred livestock and entered these contests for side cash and pure enjoyment of the game. Game, that term resurfaced. Professor Ernst Frohman, ever the cynic, bent toward his seatmate and murmured, "These folks aren't warriors in the slightest." Bull riding stayed the flashiest and most baffling highlight. Massive beasts topping 1,800 pounds whirled, reared, and now and then rammed the barriers in bids to shake off their perch. A brute dubbed Tornado had unseated 43 riders in a row, a feat the speaker touted with evident glee, as though the creature's dominance merited a claim over any flaw in conditioning. Ranch hands wagered on lasting the 8-second ride. Just 8 seconds, not prolonged stamina trials of 8 minutes, nor grueling treks spanning 8 hours, merely 8 ticks of bedlam for a shot at $75 and a gleaming trophy clasp. The audience's response offered further unskids perched atop their dad's shoulders, munching on popcorn and shouting with excitement. Older ladies dressed in their finest church attire tallied points on event sheets. Young pairs of teens clasped hands and held their breath during close calls. This crowd wasn't there to assess combat strategies or operational prowess. Instead, it was a tight-knit group honoring its shared heritage. The German captives slowly came to see that they'd gotten the whole picture wrong from the start. Insights trickled in over time via chats, messages to loved ones back home, and straightforward inquiries to U.S. sentries eager to clarify things. In the waning days of October 1943, one sentry, a corporal called Tommy Henderson out of Fort Worth, devoted a full afternoon to detailing rodeo origins for a cluster of intrigued German officers. He shared stories of the Wild West, how ranchers herded livestock from Texas up to Kansas rail yards, and how idle cowhands would pit their abilities against each other in friendly rivalries. He noted how these casual contests grew into structured spectacles during the 1880s and 1890s, culminating in the inaugural formal rodeo held in Prescott, Arizona, back in 1888. Nothing about it tied to armed forces readiness. It stemmed entirely from honoring the everyday life of cattle drivers and challenging personal prowess against animals and time limits. The outbound correspondence from these German detainees, all vetted and scanned by U.S. authorities, laid bare their shifting perspectives. Corporal Franz Burmeister, hailing from Bavaria, penned to his spouse in November 1943. Americans indulge in this odd pastime where fellows mount untamed beasts for cash and acclaim. We initially figured it for drill exercises, yet now I see it's just their custom. They relish peril itself, which sheds light on their battling style. Officials greenlit and dispatched the note, which later surfaced in intercepted German mail that scholars unearthed years afterward. Fellow detainee Ludwig Stein offered a deeper reflection in his writing. These folks from Texas hold onto a pioneering ethos we've long lost in Germany. They prize solo bravery above group conformity. I'm starting to see why they push back so hard against our vision of order. After the war, deeper accounts came to light through interviews. A 1983 German TV special delved into POW stints in the States, locating veterans from various U.S. facilities. Luftwaffe aviator Heinrich Warner recalled the rodeo epiphany vividly 4 decades on. Once it hit me that these wranglers weren't troops, that no commands forced them to hazard their lives, that they chased it all for self-respect and minor payouts, I grasped I'd misjudged America entirely. We'd pegged them as pampered, lax, fixated on ease. Yet a country where regular guys hop on raging bulls just for kicks, that's no feeble society. Maybe an odd one, sure, but hardly frail. Ex-teacher Otto Hillenberg maintained meticulous logs during his captivity, which his relatives gifted to the University of Texas collection in 1991. His notation from October 17, 1943, stated, "Watch the follow-up rodeo show. My prior notions of it as war prep feel silly now." Chatted with Corporal Henderson, who clarified, "These riders hail from spreads and homesteads, not barracks. That fellow we saw performs at a filling station in Waco. One's even a secondary school instructor. They vie on off days for awards and a bit of prize dough. Fans hail them as champs, though they're just regular folk blessed with bold guts or wild recklessness. Hard to say which yet." Slowly embracing rodeo as pure leisure rather than hidden army drills signaled a larger pivot in prisoners' takes on U.S. life. They started spotting other quirks with fresh eyes. Americans' boisterous debates over ballgame figures highlighted fierce personal drive, not sloppy control. Guards drawn from all walks, rural lads, urban youth, descendants of Italian or Polish immigrants, illustrated blending, not turmoil. The offhand defiance toward bosses among some Yanks echoed egalitarian principles, not societal rot. Not all inmates had this awakening, though. Die-hard Nazi adherents waved off the events as lavish frivolity, confirming Yankee flaws in their eyes. The wounds, the missing martial aim, the fun-first vibe all backed what Goebbels had preached. A greedy, self-centered land short on the shared resolve for real supremacy. Such types marked time, awaiting Germany's sure triumph to spring them. But many who'd seen the fight's course up close in North Africa started questioning their bets on the war's endgame. To really get why the rodeo left such a mark on these German POWs, consider the stark difference with their own world. Handling of prisoners elsewhere globally paled in comparison. The U.S. commitment to Geneva Convention protocols had its flaws. Japanese Americans endured internment camps riddled with racial bias, affecting even POW management. Still, relative to other options, the approach proved exceptionally compassionate. Captured Germans in U.S. facilities were stunned by the conditions, mainly because they anticipated harsh cruelty. Years of Nazi messaging had painted Americans as merciless thugs ready to torment any foe in custody. Instead, these Germans savored superior meals compared to those of civilians in the fatherland, joined rodeo events, and received pay for their efforts. The figures paint a vivid contrast. Around 425,000 German POWs confined in America throughout World War II saw under 1% fatalities during detention, typically from mishaps, sickness, or the rare fatal escape bid. In contrast, about 3 million Soviet captives under German control suffered nearly 58% mortality from hunger, harsh weather, killings, or grueling work meant to exterminate. Americans in German hands did slightly better, with roughly 1.2% dying in standard Wehrmacht camps, although that figure soared in the turbulent closing stages of 1945. Captives of Japan, however, confronted death rates over 27%, enduring beatings, cruel experiments, compelled toil, and abrupt executions. Camp Hearn highlighted the paradoxes in U.S. POW practices. Security measures remained rigorous there. Sentries received instructions to fire on escapees, but such deadly measures seldom proved necessary. Rule breakers among prisoners encountered punishments like isolation in dedicated holding cells. At the same time, the site boasted a 40-member prisoner orchestra delivering concerts each month, a drama group putting on sophisticated renditions of German literary masterpieces, plus learning initiatives offering English instruction, commerce classes, and practical skills development. The facility's medical unit relied on German army physicians to care for inmates and, at times, nearby residents lacking funds for paid doctors amid wartime healthcare strains. Labor assignments led to odd financial dynamics. In 1944, Germans harvesting cotton across Texas landscapes collected more in camp currency than folks in Germany managed with Reichsmarks, where shortages and bombing raids had crippled daily life. Inmates could buy smokes, sweets, hygiene items, and even instruments from the post exchange. A handful built up sufficient credits to hire regional artisans for bespoke furnishings or acquire supplies for intricate wooden sculptures. In leisure hours, enterprising detainees launched approved ventures like a haircut service, clothing repairs, and shoe mending under U.S. oversight. Imprisonment it was, no doubt, yet one that afforded shopping options and chances for enterprise. Such ease brought emotional turmoil. Certain captives grappled with intense remorse. How could they relish films and games when fellow soldiers perished on the Eastern Front? How could they feast heartily as kids in Germany went hungry beneath Allied air assaults? Correspondence from relatives detailed deteriorating circumstances, raised urban areas, and rising losses. The gap between their Texas routine and the relayed nightmares from Europe sparked mental conflict, which some dismissed outright, others sank into gloom over, and a small number channeled into total shifts in worldview. Between 1943 and 1945, multiple inmates at Herne tried to end their lives, struggling to square their eased confinement with loyalty to a crumbling nation. The U.S. rationale for kind treatment blended noble aims with practical gains. President Roosevelt and top commanders truly aimed to embody democratic principles via POW handling, proving to foes that Allied talk of liberty and respect for humanity held real weight. Strategic upsides factored in as well. Cared for prisoners yielded superior details under questioning, shied away from risky breakouts, and served as tools for morale-boosting messaging. Films showing German POWs worshiping at services in the States aired worldwide, standing in bold opposition to tales of Nazi barbarism. Reciprocity loomed large, too. Handle German detainees decently, and Germany might extend the same to seized Americans. The conflict wrapped up in May 1945, yet German POWs lingered stateside. Workforce gaps persisted. Under Geneva rules, retention was permissible until peace accords took effect, and few rushed to send masses back to a shattered Germany split into Soviet and Western spheres. The final group from Camp Herne departed via rail in late 1945 and early 1946, bound for following their arrival at ports along the East Coast. The captives were packed into Liberty ships for the voyage homeward across the Atlantic. Numerous returnees discovered their hometowns reduced to ruins from bombings, their loved ones dispersed or perished, and their nation irrevocably altered. The Germany they had departed as victorious soldiers in 1941 or 1942 was gone forever. Yet, in the ensuing years, an unforeseen development unfolded. Certain ex-prisoners kept up letter exchanges with Texas households they had encountered via labor assignments or church initiatives that delivered relief parcels. A handful even relocated as newcomers after barriers eased in the 1950s, establishing roots in Texas and forging fresh existences at the very site of their earlier confinement. Hans Miller, who had harvested cotton close to Herne as a POW, came back in 1953 alongside his recent spouse and launched a bakery in Houston, drawing on expertise honed in the camp's own baking operations. Werner Schultz, the officer who had speculated on equestrian drills, moved to Austin in 1958 and instructed in German literature at the University of Texas for 23 years. Such individuals formed just a small fraction. The majority of ex-POWs felt no pull to revisit their detention grounds, yet their decisions highlighted the singular quality of their wartime ordeal. In 1976, a gathering of former Camp Herne detainees arranged a get-together in Germany, swapping recollections and tales from their time there. More than 60 participants showed up, including some with their offspring and descendants. They recounted episodes involving rodeos, picking up English, enduring the Texas swelter, and absorbing American jazz broadcast over the camp's speakers. A number noted that their stint as POWs marked the most secure chapter of their whole wartime saga. No battles, no bombings from the Allies, no Gestapo surveillance. One old soldier put it plainly. "I made it through the war because the Americans took me in Tunisia, not the Russians in Stalingrad." The assembly resolved to contact the town of Herne, suggesting a trip to inspect whatever lingered of the facility that had held them for years. This initiative ignited an unanticipated response within Herne. By the 1980s, Camp Herne had faded from collective recall. The armed forces had shut it down in 1946, auctioning structures and gear. Ranchers repurposed the terrain, turning over barrack bases with plows and sealing up the former outhouses. Only scattered concrete pads endured, gradually vanishing under weeds and earth. However, the ex-detainees' curiosity rekindled community recollections. Longtime locals recalled the Germans toiling in the countryside, joining guarded worship gatherings, and purchasing goods in Herne using their camp vouchers. The area's historical group started amassing spoken accounts and relics, a chessboard crafted by an inmate here, a whittled cane there, sepia-toned snapshots of guard prisoner baseball matches. In 1982, 3 one-time prisoners traveled back to Herne. Now seniors in their 60s and 70s, they arrived with relatives who had listened to their narratives for years without fully accepting them. Town papers documented the occasion. The ex-POWs traversed the weed-choked grounds of the former Camp Herne, using surviving footings to get their bearings. They toured nearby ranches where they had labored 4 decades prior. And indeed, they watched a rodeo, now grasping the spectacle entirely, chuckling over their past misconceptions of bull handlers as armed horsemen. Among them, Otto Hilgenberg contributed his captivity notebooks to the Robertson County Historical Commission, offering scholars precious first-hand records. The account of German POWs and Texas rodeos emerged as a modest aside in World War II chronicles, surfacing now and then in scholarly articles or local histories. Camp Hearn earned a historical plaque in 1986, despite scant tangible traces visible now. The overarching tale that the U.S. housed almost 500,000 German captives in decent conditions amid a savage conflict still astonishes those picturing all POW ordeals as relentlessly grim. The clash of German martial strictness against Texas rancher self-reliance mirrors the grander clash of beliefs on an intimate scale. A brief, odd interlude where bewilderment yielded to insight, where foes turned into hesitant learners of one another's strikingly alien perspectives. Those 1943 rodeo outings appeared insignificant amid global carnage. Countless lives lost, urban centers ablaze, the Holocaust advancing in its industrialized terror. Yet for those who navigated that bewilderment, that dawning awareness of Americans mounting bulls for amusement and hometown acclaim, it signified something deep. It offered maybe their initial true window into the society they had opposed, their earliest realization that U.S. resilience stemmed not from autocratic control, but from something odder and tougher to overcome. The unruly, tenacious, daring bravery of independent folks who picked their own battles. Though the Germans were defeated in the conflict, a few emerged with a surprising gain from the defeat itself. A release from the doctrine that had driven them into battle to begin with, ignited in part by observing Texas ranch hands pulling off utterly wild stunts without any tactical purpose at all.